Dear LLSP alumni, welcome to this fifth program of our 2020 Lunch and Learn series. Our guest today, Ms. Noha Moustafa, is a litigation associate in the DC office of the very famous law firm of Skadden, Arps, Meagher Flom. Noha Moustafa's practice focuses on government enforcement actions, complex cross-border matters, white-collar defense, and regulatory proceedings. She's conducted internal investigations related to anti-corruption, money laundering, accounting fraud, securities fraud, healthcare fraud, a lot of fraud around these days, False Claims Act violations, and related matters. Ms. Moustafa also assists in counseling corporations and their boards in compliance matters, particularly relating to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the UK Bribery Act, and related laws. Prior to joining Skadden, Ms. Moustafa was an intern in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and also in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the US Department of State. In April 2019, Ms. Moustafa took a 4-month leave of absence from Skadden to work with the International Refugee Assistance Program, IRAP, in Amman, Jordan, as a volunteer attorney on refugee resettlement cases. During her time at IRAP, Ms. Moustafa interviewed Syrian and other refugees in particularly vulnerable situations and assisted with processing their family reunification applications under the US Refugee Admissions Program. I will only say that as somebody who practiced US immigration law for 25 years and keeps an eye on what's going on, it's kind of a useless exercise given the current attitude of the administration. You can cross all the T's and dot all the I's and you still won't get in. But be that as it may. Okay, Noha, let's start at the beginning. I believe that you came to this country as a child. Could you tell us a bit about your family, parents, siblings, and also about what your life was like growing up in the US?
Sure. I came here when my parents came in the mid-90s, maybe early mid-90s. I was like 3 or 4 years old, so I don't remember it. But we grew up, we hopped around a little bit and then eventually settled down in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I spent most of my childhood growing up. Went to high school there and then went to the University of Michigan for undergrad and then the University of Michigan for law school. A little bit out of convenience and a little bit out of like really not knowing any better or not knowing that I could apply somewhere outside of Michigan because it was kind of our first try and first go around with college applications. My parents are doctors. My older brother is in residency right now.
What's he studying, or what's he planning to? What area is he planning to work in? Oh, okay.
General surgery. And then I've got 2 younger siblings. One who is on her way to dental school and a 16-year-old teenager boy.
MashaAllah, mabruk to your parents. 2 medical professionals out of 4, that's not bad. So as the renegade, I have to ask you, because in Egypt, you either, professional families, they want an engineer or a doctor. A lawyer is okay, but they don't usually go crazy with, joy over that. Okay. And then at the bottom of the list, you go to Kulliyat al-Tijara, and get a business degree. So you have escaped the ignominy of Kulliyat al-Tijara. But tell us why you became interested in, international humanitarian law and refugee issues. Was it a particular experience or just you found yourself in that general area in terms of your studies and became more and more interested?
Yeah, I don't know if I had a particular experience. I sort of wish I did because it would make for a good background story. But we grew up in a family that I think was very service oriented from a young age. Even my brother, when, he's a surgery resident, but he took his 2 years of research and did global surgery, and he has a sustainable project that he has going in Ghana where he goes there every summer and operates and does a bunch of mission trips. So I would say we grew up with the mindset of service very deeply ingrained in us, and that we had to choose career paths that were in service of others. The question of law versus medicine or some other profession, I don't think was ever a question that ran through my mind. I just always wanted, I can't remember wanting to be anything else. I think I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was very young. And I don't know why, other than that I, wanted to impact policy in these humanitarian areas that I cared about. And even as a kid, like when I was 8, 9, 10, I was like, oh, the lawyers are the ones that do this. Lawyers are on TV. So I don't know if there was much more thought into it that went. It's weird to say it was instinctual, but in some ways it was. It was the only thing I have ever said I wanted to be. And my parents will say it's the only thing that you've ever
that
said.
they remember you ever talking about. It's interesting because I wonder whether you were inspired by some of the things that may have been on television at the time, with the invasions of Iraq, the displacement of people, pictures of
I have a very
Iraqis in refugee camps.
I have a very distinct memory and recollection of Guantanamo Bay happening and wanting to be an attorney that could shut it down or transfer the prisoners out. And it's funny to think that because since then there's been so many more violations of human rights that's kind of taken the back burner, and other things have come to the forefront. But for a very long time, like the better part of a decade, I thought that that's what I was going to do with my life, and I would be very deeply committed to shutting down Guantanamo. I don't think that was the impetus for becoming a lawyer. I had always wanted to be one, and then Guantanamo happened, and I was like, well.
But it was the focus of the kind of law that you might have wanted to practice.
Very much my whole thing.
Did you see the movie The Report that came out not so long ago? No, it was a fictional rendering of the story. Well, I shouldn't use that word, because it basically was about the production of the report on extraordinary rendition. I found it to be, I don't even know if I saw it in London, so I don't know, it may not have made a splash in the United States, but thought it was a good movie. So if you ever have some time and you want to watch it, it's a good movie. Okay. So tell me just a little bit more about your education. We know you went to the University of Michigan Law School. What did you study as an undergraduate then?
Sure. I studied political science, and then I also created a major in human rights. You could, at the time, and I think you probably still can, if you're in the honors college, you can make your own major and kind of just craft the classes that you want to take and title it whatever you want. So mine was human rights, so I did both.
And was that then the segue to your internship at the State Department?
I interned at the State Department during law school. So I can't even remember where I interned in college. But I did. I mean, I remember I interned somewhere my freshman year, somewhere I did something every summer, except for my junior year when I was studying for the LSAT. And
tends to be all consuming.
Yeah, it was all consuming, but I had always had this interest in, even apart from my internships, whatever they were at the time. And I remember I wrote my thesis in college on the torture tactics that were used at Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, well, horrible thing. You're too young to have to think about such horrors, but I guess that's what you have to get used to doing in the area that you want to focus on. Well, so Noha, you are an LLSP alumna. Tell me a bit about that experience. When, in terms of your career, was it between your undergraduate and law school, or was it after law school that you did LLSP? How'd you find out about the program, and what was the impetus for taking LLSP?
Yeah, LLSP was amazing. I did LLSP during one of my college summers. So maybe I did do it junior summer. I can't remember. Anyways, it was one of my summers in college, and I was looking for an internship and something to do, and had obviously looked up human rights, Washington, D.C., Muslim, women, etc. And KARAMAH came up.
Ticked all the boxes.
Yeah, and it wasn't even that someone had told me about it. I think I looked it up, and then I started asking about it. So that's how I heard about the program, and I applied to it. Came to DC for 6 weeks or however long it was at the time. And it was amazing, actually. And this is normal, it's 10 years later. I don't remember so much of the substance, but what I do remember were the people that I met. And I stay in touch with them to this day. I went to one of Salaha was a good friend of mine who did the program with me. I went to her wedding last year in Belgium, and we stay in touch all around the world. And it was an opportunity to meet Muslim women that were either attorneys and had been practicing or cared deeply about very similar issues at the time. So
was there a big number of international students your year? Because of course the number or the percentage, fluctuates from year to year.
There were, I want to say maybe half were international. And there was
pretty good.
Significant cohort from Belgium who I think were all friends or maybe somehow knew each other and encouraged each other to go. So those were the group. And then I can't remember if I was like roommates with them or I was staying right across the hall from them. And so I got particularly close to that group.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's very nice. So you're still in touch with many of these women then. I'm wondering, have you kind of followed some of the projects that they're involved in?
I would say I stay in touch with like 2 or 3 on a very regular basis. And yeah, for sure. One of them is a white collar lawyer. She met up with me in Jordan last summer, actually. And then one's a teacher and one works for the UNHCR. And I think she's in Geneva right now. She's in Morocco for a long time. So I do.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, speaking of Jordan, we know that you took some time off and went to Jordan and what you were doing about in general terms. Can you now give us a bit more detail about what you were doing in Jordan and some of the people you met, maybe personalize or, shed some light on the experience of people that you worked with or that you tried to help in Jordan?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just start off with like the impetus that led me to go there and talk a little bit about the substance of the work. Jordan was a really significant and important time in my life, just from a personal perspective. I'd been, I guess, I don't want to say bored of the work at the firm, but maybe just used to it and was in a personal rut and kind of felt like I was doing the same thing every day and not in the best space. And so decided I would just take some time, and this is kind of falling back on what I had grown up learning. And every time there's something a little off in your life, you gotta give back. And so I just I talked to the people at work and I said I'd really like to do this. This is really important to me, and it's important to me to always have one foot in the door in the on the ground work, as opposed to the policy work or legal work, which can make you feel a little removed from it, for 2 reasons. One, you stay connected and know what's actually happening, and 2, that work, it has very immediate satisfaction, as opposed to the policy work, which can take a very long time and can be disheartening to try to play the long game in terms of wanting a particular policy position or being a lawyer and then having impact. It can be really hard when you're young and trying to work and have that type of career trajectory. So I did that in April, and then and just kind of packed a bag and went, stayed in a hotel, then found an apartment. And it was amazing because it fulfilled actually all of the reasons that I had wanted to go and exceeded those expectations. So the day-to-day work was me and a couple other volunteers and interns, and then 2 full-time attorneys that were living in Jordan, U.S. attorneys living in Jordan hired by IRAP, and then an IRAP director, and they had 2 caseworkers. It was a really small office, I would say 6 permanent people, and then me and some other volunteers. And so we would go in, get the orientation, and then the day-to-day was doing an intake with a family, which means this family's already been screened and they could potentially come to the U.S. through the admissions program or potentially have an outlet for relief through the UNHCR in some other way. And then you do a 2-hour interview with the wife and with the husband separately. And you would hear their story and you would see which criteria they fit under. By the time a family got to the point of doing an in-person intake interview, it means that their case was particularly dire, because I had like 800-person waiting list trying to ask for help. And so the cases that were taken in intake were really, they were either like torture and violence cases, and you could do a UNHCR referral, or they happen to have a family member in the United States. Those were the 2 that you took. And so the torture, violence, persecution cases were really tough. I say they're tough on me. That's very privileged to say because, you know, I didn't go through the experience, but tough to feel like you could listen to the person, tough to figure out how to extract the information that you need without making the person too upset, not push them to say what they want to say, you know, something they don't want to say, but also getting enough detail to put in the UNHCR referral letter. That was the day-to-day. It was emotionally exhausting for two reasons. You know, the actual stories that you heard were emotionally exhausting, and you also felt unable to help, right? You know, for every person you talk to, there are thousands, if not millions, more like them, and you feel a little bit like, well, what's helping one person going to do, really?
Yeah. Well, again, I saw it from the US perspective, and one of the problems is, from the US perspective, because of this focus on security clearances, there are plenty of people who qualify for admissions. They've, you know, cleared everything except their security clearance, which gets hung up for literally years. Okay. And then, of course, we have this recent issue where basically they don't want anybody from Syria coming in. So, I mean, I suppose it felt like banging your head against the wall because these people qualify under any normal criterion for some kind of humanitarian help, but they don't get it. Did some of the people that you were doing paperwork for, did they have another avenue? In other words, were there other countries that were willing to accept them? I don't know, Australia, Europe, someplace? Or was it mostly, you know, United States?
No, actually, the United
Focus?
States wasn't and isn't really resettling refugees.
Okay, exactly.
And so I don't think the United States really was an option. So there's really only one way to get, maybe two ways to get resettled as a refugee. The most common one is through, and really this is the main one, is through the UNHCR. So you, like, let's say we all become refugees today, we're going to cross the border into Canada, and then we register with the UNHCR Canada. So all these Syrian refugees registered with UNHCR Jordan. Then UNHCR kind of gathers your story, puts you on this waiting list. At some point, if you're lucky, you get a phone call that says this country has an opening for you. Then you have to go through the individual countries' admission
Vetting procedures.
Exactly. And so there was a time in 2014 where the U.S. was settling tons of refugees, and then it stopped. And so, the Trump administration stopped that. And so what you often saw was people who had been promised admission to the United States and in 2015, and I went in 2019, and they were still waiting on the interview with USCIS, or it's like IOM and then USCIS. And so that you saw a lot. So the U.S. is not currently a major country to be resettled in. The main way is through the UNHCR, and so other countries like Canada, Germany, Australia, I don't know what they are now, but it kind of depends on their quotas, but every country takes a certain number of refugees. The second way is if you have a family member, an immediate family member in a country that allows for resettlement through that immediate family member.
Close family members, right?
Exactly. The United States is one, and I want to say Australia is the other one, but I don't want to be quoted on that one. There's only a couple that will allow resettlement for immediate family members, and that has its own separate application process. Yeah.
Well, and it's also got its own long line that you have to get into because, it's heartbreaking. Let's not talk about that. Well, I mean, mashallah, congratulations on, doing that kind of work, because it is important work, even though it's frustrating and even though there isn't very much that you really can do to help people. But in a way, it's important because you bear witness, and that's important too, because that way you see these people, and who knows, maybe one day you'll be in a position to actually make policy. So speaking of one day being in a position, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years? Do you have a detailed plan?
I have a rough plan, and very open to whatever opportunities come. I would love to be in a position of being able to draft policies that affect many of the issues I care about and think should be given more attention in the world. And so namely, human rights violations, starting with those committed by the hands of the United States and those that have been legalized in the US, because I'm American and I care about that. And then secondly, international human rights violations, and particularly torture and detention of displaced populations around the world. So those are kind of the areas that I'd like to work on and focus on and build an expertise in over the next 5 to 10 years. So part of that is by getting some actual litigation and experience in how to be a lawyer, and part of that is by getting some on the ground work, and hopefully I'll branch out into the actual policy experience soon.
So give me an idea. I mean, you're very young, so you're going to have several different kinds of jobs as you move through life, obviously. But if you were trying to plot your next move, what kind of a position would you be looking for? Would it, for example, be working for a senator or a congressperson who has particular focus on the issues that interest you, or would you be looking to work in an organization, either domestic or international, that focuses on policy work in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to work in the executive branch of the US administration, working on these types of policies and issues. That's where I would ideally like to be. Now, I understand that part of that kind of depends on what the administration's goals are and what administration wins in 2020. This year, in 2020. And so that's the goal. Like, if it's an administration that's going to value and prioritize these issues, it doesn't even have to value and prioritize them, but will allow someone to work on these issues in a way that actually has tangible impact. That's where I would love to be. But, for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to think that maybe through the US government isn't going to be the way to craft policy, that it'll either have to be through some type of international organization, or maybe it's valuable to be an advocate with an NGO. I haven't given that much thought yet. I've always wanted to work from within the US administration. So we'll see.
Might be a detour, a worthwhile one. I don't know at this point. I've never thought of, I did US immigration law for years in the United States. I never really thought about taking those skills and applying them in an international organization, but just sort of brainstorming for a moment, is there an organization, an international organization that you think might be a home for you if you couldn't move, because of political reasons in the US, basically lack of interest in these matters? Is there any particular international organization that sparks your fancy?
Abroad. I think I would want to do something with like the ICC or the ECJ or I think that would be.
I've always thought the ICJ would be a fantastic place to work, actually. Interesting cases. That, for people who don't know, that's the International Court of Justice at The Hague. And you get to see your Belgian friends, which would be lovely. Okay, well, I expect great things from you, Noha. I will be watching. I can see you're putting together your portfolio of experiences and talents very carefully. So thank you so much for spending this time with me and your sister LLSP Alumni today. And thank you also for your service to KARAMAH on the Alumni Committee and as co-secretary of the board, which reminds me, I need to talk to you about that, but not here. And now, for a few quick closing plugs. First, because of COVID-19, KARAMAH is moving its law and leadership program online. The 2020 LLSP runs for 3 weekends in July, starting the weekend of the 11th, 12th of July. There are still a very few places open, so please make sure you let your friends know, or you could sign up yourself for a refresher. Just because you're an alum doesn't mean you can't come back and take a refresher. And second, our next Lunch and Learn program is scheduled for Thursday, the 23rd of July at 2020, at noon. Our guest will be Ms. Rahima Abdul-Alim. Rahima currently works as the Deputy General Counsel at the Executive Office of the President. That's a mouthful. Before that, she worked as a senior trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice, a graduate of Yale and then Harvard Law School. She's one of only a few Muslim women at the higher levels of the US government. I can't wait to interview her, and I hope that you can join us then. Thank you all very much for being here today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.